Lila Monroe was simply a woman leaving the store, groceries in one hand and car keys in the other, the gentle curve of her second trimester belly visible beneath a faded sweatshirt. The sky was calm, the receipt still warm in her bag. It should have been one of those ordinary days that vanish into the blur of errands and soft music on the radio. But for Lila Monroe, it would become the day the color of her skin was treated as probable cause. The day a nation would watch in silence the cost of a mistaken identity. They ordered her to the ground. She told them she was pregnant. They repeated the command. She asked why, and before the question could fully leave her lips, the pavement kissed her cheek. Her body, the same body carrying a child, crashed down and was pinned beneath the weight of two uniformed officers who never asked her name. They never asked what was in the bag. They never checked the receipt. Their mental algorithm moved too fast. Only the dark sweatshirt, only suspicion. Someone recorded, someone shouted, someone cried. Nothing stopped what followed. She did not scream. She did not resist. She only whispered through rising fear, "Please call my husband." One of them mocked her. "He is a lawyer." The officer chuckled without looking up. She tried to say more. "He is the director," but they would not let her finish, because in their world, that did not matter. Not in the parking lot. Not in a neighborhood where the myth of safety had always been conditional. In the world they believed they knew, she was simply another problem to neutralize. And that is exactly what they tried to do until the phone began to ring. What they did not know, what they never paused to imagine, was that the man on the other end of that missed call was no ordinary husband. He was the newly appointed director of the FBI, a man whose work was to investigate misconduct exactly like this, a man whose silence after that night would never be an option. But this is not a story about privilege. It is a story about assumptions. It is about what happens when authority is exercised without accountability, when power loses patience, and when a person's dignity is dismissed before her identity is even heard. It is a reminder that viral moments are not born of sensationalism. They are born of injustice captured in real time. This is not fiction. This is not an episode of a legal drama or a fashionable true crime podcast. This is America. This is now. And this is the story of how the quiet strength of one woman, the disciplined restraint of one man, and an act of prejudice too careless to hide ignited a reckoning that can no longer be postponed. Lila Monroe rose that day the way she always did on a workday, long before the children stirred and before her husband's second alarm. She poured a cup of coffee that cooled before she ever took a sip. She packed 2 school lunches and kissed her children as they raced toward the bus stop. Nothing in the air felt extraordinary. Nothing hinted that her name would trend across social media by evening. As she drove to the store, her mind drifted elsewhere. Lesson plans, pediatric appointments, the soft flutter in her belly, reminding her that motherhood was beginning again. She dressed the way she always did. Comfortable shoes, yoga pants, a gray sweatshirt with the school mascot on the back. No jewelry, no makeup. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was only trying to get through the day. Inside the supermarket, she moved through the aisles with practiced ease. Diapers, wipes, almond milk, prenatal vitamins. She paid the total, nodded politely to the cashier, and walked toward her car. Behind her, an employee hesitated. Something about Lila's appearance unsettled him. Perhaps it was the hooded sweatshirt. Perhaps it was the bag that looked too full. Or perhaps it was simply the way unconscious bias can whisper into action before reason has a chance to speak. And so a call was made. A woman matching a vague description, possibly shoplifting, was heading to the parking lot. When officers Hale and Crow received the report, they did not question it. They saw a black woman alone beside a silver Honda Civic, opening the rear door to load her belongings. No raised voices, no hurried movements, only groceries and a quiet sigh. But to them, this was the suspicious activity the call had described. They approached fast and spoke with force. Their weapons stayed holstered, yet their voices were sharp, cutting, commanding. "Ma'am, we need you to sit on the curb." Lila looked up, startled. "Is something wrong?" she asked, the receipt still in her hand. "Do what I say," one of them snapped. The other stepped closer. Lila, confused but calm, explained that she was pregnant and preferred to remain standing. "I'm not resisting. I don't understand why you're stopping me." Her words were quiet, measured, the way black women are taught to speak in moments like these, when tone can be mistaken for threat and dignity can be read as defiance in an instant. But the officers did not hear her tone. They only saw her posture. And when she hesitated for a fraction of a second, Officer Crow moved first, hands on her shoulders, a twist, a shove. Lila's world tilted. The ground struck her before she could brace herself. Her elbow scraped the concrete. Her unborn child kicked. A passerby gasped. Another lifted a phone. She did nothing. Someone shouted. Officer Hale reached for the cuffs, while Lila's voice cracked. "I'm pregnant. I'm not resisting. Please stop." But the officers were not listening to her. They were listening to their own urgency, their own training, their own fears. Fears calibrated over years by implicit bias and media-fueled suspicion. They did not stop. Instead, Officer Hale muttered, "If it's so important, why isn't he here?" The other scoffed, calling her another person playing the victim. A nearby shopper shouted again, "I saw her pay. She didn't take anything." But it was no longer about theft. It never truly had been. It was about control, containment, de-escalation through domination. And for Lila, it became painfully clear that they were not interested in questions, only conclusions. It did not escape her that her husband was the director of the FBI, yet she had lived long enough to know what that protected her from and what it did not. Gabriel had warned her early in their marriage, "Never assume they will know who you are. They will only see what they want to see." She used to think he was being overly cautious. Now, with her cheek pressed against the stained asphalt, she knew he had simply been realistic. At FBI headquarters, Gabriel paced. Lila never missed their midday call. When she did not answer the first time, he let it go. The second time, he called again. By the third, he sent a message. No reply. That was not like her. He felt it in his soul. Something was wrong. Back at the scene, an elderly woman stepped forward, phone trembling in her hands. "This is wrong," she said, showing the video to a sergeant who had just arrived. The recording was short but clear. Lila buying formula, Lila thanking the cashier, Lila walking to her car. The sergeant watched in silence, face tight. "Who reported this?" he asked. The answer came. The store manager said she looked suspicious. Had anyone verified a theft? "No, sir, not yet." The sergeant approached the two officers. "Get her up, now." They hesitated. "Sir, she was resisting." He repeated, "Get her up." As they lifted her, Lila winced. Her right wrist was swollen, her face scratched, yet the deepest pain was knowing that no one had listened. Not until it became undeniable, not until the evidence arrived in pixels and silence. Gabriel had already tracked Lila's last known location through their shared device data. The supermarket. He called the manager, no answer. He called the precinct, no clear records. Finally, someone from command approached him, visibly shaken. "Sir, there was an incident. A black woman was detained outside a store. Her identity is not confirmed, but she matches the description of Mrs. Monroe." He did not shout. He did not panic. He simply said, "Where is she?" and left the room. Lila sat in the back of the patrol car without handcuffs. Someone offered her water. She did not drink. A younger female officer asked gently, "Is there anyone we should call?" Lila nodded. "My husband, Gabriel Monroe." The officer hesitated. "He's the director of the FBI." The young officer blinked. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Lila repeated it clearly, without apology. The officer stepped away, fumbling for a phone. The sergeant beside him looked at the name, went pale, and muttered a curse. Because in that instant, the story changed. The suspect now had a name, a history, a connection that demanded accountability. But what they did not understand, what they could not have expected, was that Gabriel was not seeking revenge. He was seeking answers, not to protect power, but to expose its absence. Because Lila, his wife, was not the exception. She was the rule that governed the lives of too many Americans. That blackness in public could be answered with suspicion and force before words were ever exchanged. So when Gabriel arrived without cameras or press, face drawn with silent fury, he did not speak first. He looked at the officers, at the scratches on his wife's arms. The video played without commentary. At last he said, "We will handle this properly, internally, legally, and with transparency." Lila leaned into him, not to collapse, but to be seen. And for the first time that day, someone truly did. Lila had been there before. stopped for driving too slowly on the outskirts, followed by clerks who smiled with suspicion, but never like this. This was different. As the officers approached, she felt her heart slow rather than race. She heard the sharpness in their tone, read the certainty in their body language. Her training activated. Stay calm. No sudden movements. No questions that sound like protest. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm pregnant. I haven't done anything." But inside she was screaming. They never checked the bag in her hand. They never asked for the receipt. They never even looked inside the cart. What they saw was the color of her skin, the clothing, the posture, an algorithm of prejudice they called suspicion. Officer Hale scoffed without meeting her eyes. "Don't think you're different from the others." The words landed like a slap. The others, that invisible group into which black people are sorted before the facts ever catch up. Lila reached slowly for her phone. Her fingers trembled, not from guilt, but from years of learned fear. "I need to call my husband," she said. But the moment the screen lit with Gabriel's name, a boot came down. The device shattered against the concrete. Her lifeline was cut with a single motion. "That's resisting," Officer Crow said. "Now we have a problem." From the other side of the curb, a child's voice cut through the tension. A young white girl tugged her mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mom, why are they hitting that lady?" The mother said nothing. She could not. She was paralyzed, not by danger, but by the shame that burns hotter than fear. Officer Hale barked louder, needing to reclaim control as attention grew. "You're resisting lawful orders," he shouted, half to Lila, half to the cameras rising from nearby phones. "You'll be charged if you don't comply." Lila scraped her knees. Her palms bled as she tried to break the fall. She could not react quickly enough, not by their standards. Tears filled her eyes, not from physical pain, but from a deeper fracture. She was not crying for herself. She was crying because she knew the rules and had followed every one of them. Still, she was here. Her voice broke, trembling and sharp. "I taught your children." Her breath caught. "I've been in your schools, in your libraries. I gave everything to this place." But the badges did not flicker. They did not recognize her. A man from the crowd stepped forward. "She paid for her things," he said, waving the receipt he had retrieved from the wind. "I saw it myself." He held it out, hoping for a pause, some hesitation. There was none. The officers did not take it. They did not even look. Authority, once in motion, does not interrupt its own rhythm. Blood began to trickle down Lila's forehead from a scrape against the pavement. The baby kicked hard, so hard she gasped. Her entire torso pulsed with sharp pain, her body confused by the violence she had been ordered to endure in silence. Her lips trembled, her breath came in short gasps. The only thought racing through her mind was, "Protect the baby, protect the baby." As they twisted her wrists behind her back, a name escaped her mouth, not as a threat, not as a weapon, but as a cry for identity. "Call my husband, Gabriel Monroe. He's the director of the FBI." Was not a threat. It was a lifeline, a plea to be seen as human. Finally, a car screeched nearby. A black sedan. A plainclothes agent stepped out, older, high-ranking. His gaze swept the scene and then locked. He recognized her face. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The color drained from his cheeks. In an instant, the incident shifted, not in fact, but in fear of consequence. The ranking officer, Lieutenant Shaw, stood frozen, his eyes fixed on Lila's face, then on the blood, the tight plastic restraints, the bruises already forming too quickly on her exposed wrists. He had seen this before, complaints, lawsuits, media coverage, but never so close, never involving someone whose name was about to become national news. The moment he heard Gabriel Monroe, director of the FBI, it echoed in his ears not as a title but as a clock already ticking. He stepped forward and spoke without looking at Hale or Crow. "Uncuff her, now!" There was a beat of silence. Officer Hale hesitated, confused. "Sir, we followed protocol. She didn't cooperate." "I said now." The tone left no room for reply. They cut the plastic ties. Lila's arms fell limp at her sides, but she did not rise. She stayed on the curb, catching her breath. No one apologized. The people around the scene kept filming, yet their silence was denser than the phones they held. Everyone had watched it unfold in real time. Every decision, every error, every unnecessary use of force. The revelation of her husband's identity had not undone the abuse. It had only changed how others perceived its cost. Lila rose slowly. Her sweatshirt was torn. Her belly tightened with the baby's movements, reacting to the adrenaline like a silent protest from within. Lieutenant Shaw crouched and offered his hand. She did not take it. Instead, she looked him straight in the eyes and asked quietly, "Would you be here if I weren't married to him?" He said nothing. Moments later, a team of paramedics arrived. They were kind, respectful, visibly shaken. One asked if she needed a stretcher. She declined. "I can walk," she said, even though her legs trembled. As they helped her to her feet, someone from the crowd stepped forward, a young college student who had been recording from the moment she left the store. "I have everything," he said. "It's already online." She nodded. "Keep it that way." Back at the station, Lieutenant Shaw ordered a full internal review. In private, he made 3 calls, to his chief, to legal counsel, and finally to a discreet line he reserved for political emergencies. What unsettled him more than the cameras, more than the civil rights implications, was this. Lila had done nothing wrong, and every second had been documented. It could not be hidden. No one could hide it. Meanwhile, Lila sat in the back of an ambulance, hands wrapped in gauze. Her phone was finally returned. Broken. Barely functional. She stared at it, then opened the last unread message from Gabriel. "Are you okay? I haven't heard from you." Her fingers trembled as she typed, "I'm alive. Barely." That night, the images reached national media. News broadcasts across the country carried the headline, "Woman assaulted by police. Her husband is director of the FBI." But for Lila, the important thing was never the headline. It was the hundreds of messages from other women, Black, Latina, immigrant, poor, who said, "This happened to me too." No one listened. Gabriel arrived at the hospital late. He brought no security detail, no team, only himself. He entered her room, saw the bandages, the bruises, the sterile beeping of machines. But it was her eyes that undid him, not rage, not pain. That deep, wordless exhaustion that comes when dignity is tested again and again. He took her hand, held it gently, and for the first time that day, she closed her eyes and let her shoulders drop. Neither of them slept because both knew what came next was not justice. It was scrutiny, hearings, investigations, public opinion, political maneuvering, and beneath it all, a question neither could fully answer. If she had not been his wife, would she still be alive? Security footage from the parking lot was pulled. Not one camera, but 4 angles. Body camera recordings were requested. Cell phone videos uploaded by witnesses to TikTok, Facebook, even Reddit were collected. A single picture began to form. A woman who never raised her voice, never ran, never lied, yet was treated as though a threat walked beside her. Lila did not file criminal charges directly against the 2 officers. She filed a formal civil suit against the police department, the city, and its training division. The lawsuit was deliberate, carefully worded to name, maintain, and protect a culture of policing in which unconscious bias produces predictable harm to innocent civilians, especially women of color. She named no individuals. She named a system. This was not a woman demanding punishment. This was a woman demanding recognition. Lila did not appear on television. She declined interviews, declined invitations to national talk shows, segments, and features. Instead, she accepted an invitation to testify before the local legislative council during hearings on the police budget. A conference room with no applauding audience, only 15 legislators, 2 microphones, and the silence that only gravity can hold. She wore gray, hair pulled back, no makeup, no script. She walked to the podium and placed a photograph in front of her. It showed a classroom of 23 third graders, some smiling, some distracted, all of them children of color. "These are my students," she said, "and I want them to know what happens when they are told, without words, that their skin makes them suspicious." She did not speak of herself until the 5th minute. She spoke instead of Marcus, 9 years old, labeled aggressive because he tapped his foot too fast. Of Lily, suspended for telling a teacher to stop yelling. Of the mother who once asked her quietly, "What do I tell my son when he sees the police and flinches?" Then she told the story, not as a victim, but as a teacher, a storyteller, a witness. "I was stopped without being asked. I was restrained without resistance. I was presumed guilty before anyone asked me anything. And I am here not because my husband holds a federal office, but because my child is still alive. Others do not get that chance." She paused, then looked directly into the eyes of the counsel. What will you do when your child is face down on the sidewalk, gasping for air, while their receipt blows into the gutter? Must it. No one coughed. No papers shuffled. No one dared glance at their phones. At the back of the room, Gabriel stood, not as director, but as a man who could no longer protect his wife with rank alone. His gaze was tired, not from work, but from restraint. Lila looked at him only once and continued. You have officers with badges. You have systems with manuals, but you have people with judgment. Because I watch the training videos too. I teach from them. But training does not stop harm when bias goes unchecked. Her final sentence did not tremble. It struck. This was not a bad day. This was a system working exactly as it was designed. And then she stepped down. The room did not applaud. It was never meant to. It was meant to unsettle. Lila's testimony did not trend on social media. It did not gather millions of likes. But it did something more dangerous. It entered the record. The city clerk transcribed every word. Her voice, steady, objective, measured, was now part of public governance. It was legally archived, not as outrage, but as evidence. Behind the scenes, the response did not begin with apologies. It began with deflection. A city spokesperson issued a brief statement. We take these allegations seriously and support a thorough review. But Lila was not interested in their seriousness. She wanted transparency. So through her attorney, a former civil rights professor, she filed a Freedom of Information request, not for emails, but for training materials. She demanded to see exactly what bias prevention training officers Hale and Crow had received. The results stunned even her. 2 PowerPoint presentations from 3 years earlier, one lasting 36 minutes, the other marked optional. No assessments, no follow-up, no scenario-based modules involving black civilians. Nothing about interacting with pregnant people. Lila brought those files to the next council hearing and laid them on the table. This is what is called training, she said. Officers are not being prepared to avoid bias. They are being prepared to defend it. The room shifted again. One council member nodded slowly and leaned into the microphone. We will reopen the committee for curriculum review. Gabriel watched from the hallway. He still had not spoken publicly about Lila's lawsuit, and he would not. His silence was not absence. It was discipline. He did not want to become the story. Lila was in command. She was rewriting how justice responds when the goal is not anger, but redirection. Behind closed doors, the city's attorneys offered a settlement. 6 figures, a confidentiality clause, no admission of wrongdoing. Lila read it in silence and then slid it back. I don't need money. I need your commitment to reform. The room went still. An official asked, what would that look like? She answered without hesitation. Mandatory annual bias evaluation, not a one-time event. Training modules co-developed by educators. Real scenario drills evaluated by community panels. Not every officer needs to be fired, but every officer must receive thorough, individualized training. It was not a negotiation. It was a condition. Within a week, the city publicly committed to overhauling the entire training division under civilian oversight. Lila had achieved what most cases never do. She had broken institutional denial. As word spread, other cities took notice. Her testimony was requested by advocacy groups. Her educational framework on implicit bias was adapted into a pilot program in 3 school districts. Civil liberties organizations began citing her dignity-centered, evidence-based, forward-looking approach. Her still-pending lawsuit became a legal model for others seeking systemic accountability rather than mere compensation. Meanwhile, the officers involved remained on administrative leave. They were not protected, yet they were not sacrificed. Lila refused to let the city turn them into scapegoats. This is not only about what they did, she told a local reporter. It is about what they were taught to do and what no one stopped them from becoming. In private moments, Gabriel still asked, "Are you sure you want to keep going?" And she always answered the same way. "I want the next woman to be able to walk to her car without having to rehearse how to survive." One morning, she returned to her classroom with a new assignment pinned to the board. The heading read, "What does it mean to be believed?" The children wrote their answers, some literal, some profound. One wrote, "It means people listen the first time." The struggle had never been about power. It had been about making the truth undeniable so the system could no longer pretend it did not see. Lila did not leave as a heroine. She left tired, not defeated, but worn. Change does not arrive with applause. It arrives in audits, in rewritten policies, in training manuals that carry her words printed beside legal definitions. Her story had shaken the system not because she demanded vengeance, but because she demanded vision. The final internal review concluded with a single line from the board. A systemic lapse occurred, cold, formal, yet for once honest. Behind that wording lay more than 120 pages of findings, including recommendations for full civilian oversight of future misconduct reviews, improved protocols for pregnant detainees, and updated accountability frameworks. Lila never returned to that building. She had learned something deeper, that justice in its purest form was never about generating headlines or enemies. It was about changing who is protected by default. She left not with a victory in her hands, but with a wave of reckoning that would not quiet. Officer Crow resigned without a press release or admission of guilt. Yet Lila did not need it. She was not seeking remorse. She was seeking a world in which the next Lila would not have to be known in order to be safe. Officer Hale was reassigned and later placed in a long-term retraining program under civilian supervision. Lila declined to comment. In time, Gabriel and Lila welcomed their daughter, Eliana Grace, into a quieter room filled with soft music and no sirens. Lila held her and whispered something no one else could hear. A promise, perhaps a prayer, perhaps simply the relief of finally breathing free of fear. They never moved. They remained in the same neighborhood, the same school, the same supermarket. Because real change is not achieved by escaping. It is achieved by staying and making things better. Lila's presence became a reminder that justice is not only what happens in courtrooms. It is what happens in classrooms, on sidewalks, in city council chambers, places where dignity must be reintroduced as law. Gabriel changed too. He spoke less publicly but advocated more internally, quietly shaping FBI policy, pushing for the integration of biased research into federal training, and championing community trust units. Yet it was Lila who taught him the harder truth, that silence, even strategic silence, must answer to conscience. Years afterward, when a journalist asked if she had ever forgiven the officers, she paused, not from bitterness, but from precision. "Forgiveness is not the point," she said. "Accountability is." Then she added, "But I hope they have become better men. I hope they teach their own children to stop and ask before they act." The mural on the school wall remains. Her profile, not as a victim, but as a voice. Beneath it, Eliana's tiny handprint was added later in blue paint. Justice reimagined does not mean perfect outcomes. It means we stop accepting predictable harm as inevitable. It means power is no longer measured by rank or uniform, but by the courage to admit error, repair damage, and rebuild better. Lila did not rewrite the law. She rewrote the way people saw. And through her, millions began to see not only her pain, but their own reflection. And for the first time, they did not look away.